The topic of tonight's discussion is text at a Windward Mark. And this, in thinking about it, I realize this is a much larger subject than we can cover in one session, probably even two. So I've tried to break it up into three different parts. One of which is the actual discussion of strategy and tactics, which I hope to do tonight. And then another session, probably next week, which will be about what if boats are coming into the mark on opposite tacks. In essence, tacking in the zone. And then the third discussion would be, well, what if boats are coming in to the mark on the same tack, either both on starboard tack or both on port tack? Tonight's discussion, I hope, will be about strategy and tactics. The other two are probably going to turn out to be mainly about rules. So that said, I have produced this image for people to look at and see which way do you think is the best way or the worst way to come into a windward mark. And I've put in 5 different options here. I'm sure there are many others. But to that end, does anybody have an opinion? Don't all speak at once.
I would generally like to lay the line on starboard, but what do I know?
From how far away?
I'm generally lost out there, so I generally do it from way out.
That's what I tried to represent with green here, is somebody who has approached the windward mark from a very long distance away.
For me, it would depend on whether I want to stay on starboard after rounding the mark, or if I want to go on port and go off to the left. Because, for instance, the red boats compared to the light blue boat, they're going around at roughly the same time. That light blue boat is kind of stuck out there to the right. It's going to be hard for them to get over to the left, whereas the red boat is in the reverse position. So I try to set up ahead of time, depending on which way I want to go afterwards.
There's also a lot of positional on which side of the course was favored, where you're coming in from. Yellow is far enough ahead that they can get away with tacking that close to the mark. And also, like Charlie said, where you want to go afterwards. The other consideration, are you a monohull or a multi-hull?
Well, don't view this as a scenario with all of these boats in these positions at these times. Just look at it as, you know, if there are or are not other boats around, you know, which way would you like to approach the mark from? Not necessarily of who's ahead of whom.
Do the
Although that
conditions
will
make
enter into this discussion.
Do the conditions make any difference? The amount of wind, the direction of the wind?
Do they make any difference to your tactics and your strategy?
I would say 3, because you're obviously not overstanding it. I'm sorry, I'm calling the yellow boat 3 for some reason.
Any other opinions? Is there any way that anybody's doing here that you think is bad? Is a bad way or a dangerous way or an inefficient way of approaching the mark?
Yellow is pretty risky. You have to find a gap in all those boats on the starboard ley line. Red and blue are both a little risky because green is going to mess up their air. If they mess it up enough, they may not make the mark. So green is probably the safest, but they lose ground by overstanding.
But
I thought the question was if nobody else is around.
If they are or if they aren't, but not necessarily in this particular orientation.
so my guess is without considering any other boat, that the light blue boat would be the best way around.
I would like to do a combination of the light blue boat and the red boat. I like to tack just outside the 3-boat zone so I don't have the penalty problem. But I like to be closest to the mark. So I would want to be on the inside of the blue boat, but tack right before the zone rather than farther away like the red boat. So I like blue where it tacks, but I like red because it's on the inside of the blue boat.
So you're saying that the blue boat should attack earlier in order to get a be between the red boat and the mark, and closer to the mark than the other boats.
Yeah, but if blue had tacked, light blue had tacked any earlier, he might have not been able to make the mark.
Well, if the red boat could tack and make the mark, and they're similar boats, then the blue boat should have been able to tack and make the mark at the same point. The blue boat tacked later, looking at this,
You're right.
than he needed to. He needed to tack somewhere between the 2 and 3 point for him, and that would have put him ahead of the 2 and 3 point on the red boat, because he could not have tacked in because he would not have made the mark. So he would have had to go further and then tack him on the behind the blue boat, directly behind the blue boat.
Isn't the red boat is not overlapped with the blue boat, so it
What
has
point?
it has to give way. It has to give blue room to get round the mark. It doesn't. Blue boat doesn't have to give him any room.
Right. The blue boat has mark room. There's no doubt about that. But he's already at 3. He's already around the mark by the time we're talking about the light blue and the red boat tacking. Okay, the dark
Oh, I'm
blue
not.
boat.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I meant the light blue boat, not the dark blue boat.
Yeah, the light blue boat, he should have tacked before he did, basically, in order to cut off the red boat. If he had tacked between 2 and 3, he would have been on the ley line for the mark, and red would have had to have come up and tacked behind him to stay on the ley line, or if he had tacked earlier, he would not have made the mark.
But he's risky because he's inside the zone.
Right.
Any other comments, opinions, or guesses?
Risking somebody's purchase.
Because the yellow boat and the dark blue boat are already around the mark by the time these guys are starting their tacks. So, they're not even part of the picture as far as the red boat and the light blue boat are concerned, because they're already gone.
Well, let me share the conventional wisdom with you. The conventional wisdom is that generally, the way red is approaching the mark is preferable. That is, she's approaching the ley line, the starboard tack ley line on port tack, and she tacks about 5 boat lengths from the mark. 5 to 10 boat lengths is usually what the experts recommend.
What is the reason for that?
Because you're coming into on starboard tack.
Well, take a look at green. If she tacked onto starboard from a long ways away, then she either runs a real risk of missing the ley line and coming in low and having to tack again, or of overstanding the mark. And for displacement boats, overstanding the mark is a penalty. Every boat length that you sail beyond the ley line is a boat length that you won't get back. Now, for multi-hulls and planing hulls, overstanding the mark is not such a huge penalty. And for lasers, for example, coming in under the ley line is not a huge penalty. So the answer is really going to change depending on the characteristics of your boat But in general, if you come in on the starboard, if you try to make the starboard tack ley line from a long distance away, it's very hard to judge where the ley line is. And there's a good chance you're either going to come in short or you're going to overstand. And for most boats, there's a disadvantage. There's a time you have to make up, that you either lose time for overstanding or lose time for having to tack again. It's a lot easier to judge where the ley line is when you come up to it only 5 or 10 boat lengths away from the mark. And the reason they pick 5 to 10 mainly is so that you make sure you complete your tack onto starboard outside the zone. That way, the rule about tacking in the zone doesn't come into play for you.
Okay.
Because if you do tack in the zone and there are starboard tack boats around, that can get very bad for you very quickly. I don't want to get into those rules tonight specifically, but I will say the rules are written to really discourage tacking in the zone. For the most part, if you approach a windward mark on opposite tacks, you are not entitled to room at the mark if you're coming in on port. It's strictly a starboard port situation. So if you come in like the yellow boat, which I've seen many boats do, especially in big regattas with crowded roundings, you'll often see people trying to sneak in, but it's very dangerous to do. Because if you're coming in as yellow and trying to find a spot at the mark and there's a big line of starboard tack boats, they're not going to let you in. If you come in like light blue does, you see he's head to wind right at the zone. There's a real danger that he's actually tacking, he's passing head to wind in the zone. If you're anywhere close, you're taking a big risk that you have to give, well, you're going to be controlled by the rule for tacking in the zone, which I'll get into later. Anyway, it's a very risky position for light blue. So the conventional wisdom would be that actually light blue is possibly the worst position to come in the mark at, because he's not coming real tight to the mark. He's going to get mixed up in a line of starboard tack boats, and he's going to be subject to the rule about tacking in the zone. So we say green, you run the risk of overstanding or understanding the mark. Red is a good place. Either there 5 boat lengths to 10 boat lengths away is a very powerful way to approach the mark. Light blue is in a really bad position if there's a bunch of starboard tack boats coming. Yellow is in a very risky position if there's a bunch of starboard tack boats coming. If there aren't, then he's probably picked one of the fastest ways around the mark. If he's all alone on port tack, if there's somebody coming behind him on port tack, then he's in trouble. And that's really a discussion for time after next. But if yellow comes in and there's a boat to windward of and behind him, that's a very risky position, and he may wind up getting driven away from the mark. Dark blue, if there are only boats coming in on port tack, then dark blue is possibly the strongest way to come into the mark. It's so that if he doesn't owe anybody mark room, then he can scrape them all off at the windward mark and make it around clear. However, if there are any starboard tack boats coming, he's in real trouble because he's going to be in their way on port tack. So there is no single best answer. It depends on what the traffic is around you. But the conventional wisdom is if you come in like red, 5 to 10 boat lengths from the mark on port to the starboard tack ley line, then you don't have to worry about starboard port situations at the mark or problems with tacking in the mark. and you stand a good chance of finding a hole in the line of starboard tack boats. The closer you get to the mark, the harder it is to find a hole in the line of starboard tack boats if you're in a big fleet. Does that make sense to everybody? Or does anybody disagree with me on any of that? Okay, well, let's go on to another picture. I think it was Charlie who said it depends on how he wants to leave the mark, how far from the mark he wants to come in. Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah, that's one factor.
Okay, so that's an important discussion. How do you want to approach the mark is, how far from the mark do you want to be when you get there? And I think, Charlie, you said it depends on how you want to come out. Does anybody else have an opinion? Which one of these would be in how far from the mark you want to be? Even if there were no other boats around, or if they were around but not necessarily in this particular right next to each other position. Well, certainly the green boat is leaving a lot of space between him and the mark. He's sailing a lot faster than he has, a lot farther than he has to make it around the mark. The yellow boat is probably just making the mark, and if he has to make a tight maneuver around the mark, he's going to go slow. The dark blue boat, I would venture, is probably in the position where he's going to be able to do the fastest rounding. He's going to be able to maintain his boat speed the best. The red boat is in a very dangerous position, depending on how she got there. If she came in to the zone on starboard tack, inside of any other boats, then she is entitled to mark room and she can luff up and shoot the mark. So it's a position that if she was on starboard coming in, she can make it around the mark and she'll be inside. She may be slow, but she can get in there. If, however, she tacked in the zone, then she can't luff the other boats up, and she may well get pinched out at the mark and have to turn around and come back. So let's move on to a nice simple picture.
Okay.
Depending on who you talk to, or what books you read, or whose tactics videos you watch, there are a number of different ways that you can come out of a windward mark. And I've chosen to show 6 of them. I think this picture is really busy, so let's talk about them 3 at a time. So I've shown 3 different ways of coming out of the windward mark, rounding the windward mark and heading downwind if you want to stay on starboard tack. Now, does anybody have a preference for any of these?
Doesn't yellow mean he's basically passing? Like getting a deeper run?
Okay, what I've shown is the blue boat is actually sailing the fastest course around the mark. What we would call the best VMG course. He comes in about a boat length wide of the mark, turns at the mark, and sails away about a boat length. You know, sets his spinnaker right at the mark, if he has a spinnaker, and sails his fastest course downwind. And if you look here, you'll see he's actually farther downwind, closer to the leeward mark than either of the other boats. So I would say if there are no other boats around and you don't have any particular reason for wanting to go high or deep, then this is the fastest way to sail the course.
Blue.
For a Flying Scot, at least, if the wind is above 15 or so, dead down is pretty much as fast as sailing at an angle like that. So, all else being equal, I would take yellow in a higher winds. And
Okay, yeah, it's all going to change depending on the boat type and the wind conditions. Because for a multi-hull, obviously green is going to be the way you want to go because they sail much higher angles. If you're sailing a boat like the Tanzer 16, like I do, I like sailing dead downwind. So we'll turn a little tighter. That will be my fastest course. But bear in mind that the direction you're coming in from and the direction you're going out at will vary from boat to boat and weather conditions to weather conditions, but there will still be a choice of, do you want to sail your VMG course, best VMG course, or do you want to come out sailing hot, or do you want to come out sailing deep?
In my opinion, one of the other really important factors is you got to find free air. Doesn't matter what course you're on. If you're getting rolled, you got to get out. Whatever course it is, it has to be designed to get you a clear air for as long as possible in that downwind leg. Now that does not mean, gee, I'm going to go off into la la land like green is, but it does mean if you're light blue and there's somebody on your tail, then either you come up or you jibe away as soon as possible and just break free, because otherwise they're just going to ride you and then jibe over you at the next mark. It's really important to not sit there and play games. Sit there having somebody taking your air while the rest of the fleet goes by. Rather, break away as soon as possible is the most important thing. Most people sit down on a run and don't jibe, unless they're like, oh yeah, I just want to go to the left of starboard side of the course. But it's just important to find that clear air behind you. Game who's riding over you.
Okay, I just got a notification from Zoom that time is running out on us. So I'll try to do this quickly. But yes, there's a strategic choice to be made for where do you want to be on the race course, and there's a tactical choice to be made of, do I want to get away from other boats? And you may want to go green if there's a strategic reason, like there's better wind on that side and you want to get there quickly, or there's current relief. Or if you simply want to try to roll a boat or get away from a boat that's threatening to roll you. And the same thing for yellow. If you want to preserve your ability to jibe, then, or if you have come across in a bit of a header and you want to stay on starboard, but you think a shift is coming and you want to preserve your ability to jibe, then you might round inside like yellow. Or if you have come to the mark on a lift and you want to jibe soon, but you think there's going to be a shift back, you might want to do what blue is doing. That is, take your fastest course around the mark, set your spinnaker, keep your boat speed up, and then jibe. That protects your ability to jibe back. If you think the wind is actually better on the right side of the course, then you might come in a little higher so that you can round tighter and come out and get a faster track back to the better wind or better current, or staying out of the way of boats in front of you. If it's really better and you need to get there as fast as you can, and you're willing to sacrifice some speed in doing a slow rounding and sacrifice some speed at being underneath a line of boats that are rounding above you and casting dirty air on you, then you might choose to do a jibe set. That is, jibe the boat and then set your spinnaker. So I hope you realize that what's the best way to come in and how far you want to be from the mark really depends on where do you want to be when you exit. So I think the right answer is, before you even get to your last tack, have made a decision about how you want to exit the mark. When you're still coming up just getting near the Windward Mark, talk to your crew, think about where do I want to be coming out? And that's going to determine how far from the mark I go before I tack to come into the mark. What kind of rounding do I want to make? If I can make it, if other boats are around me and prevent me from making it, what's my plan B for getting out of there? And how do I want to stay away from other boats? If there's boats ahead of me, how do I want to keep boats from taking my wind and rolling me when I come out? So it's a very complicated decision-making process that ideally you make early. And I confess I don't always make it early myself. A lot of times we're coming to the Windward Mark and the Tanzer and Jolene would say, Eric, what tack do you want to be on after we round the mark? And I will say, I don't know yet. And I really should already have that plan and not only know what tack I want to be on, but whether I want to sail hot, deep, my best VMG, or jibe, sail hot, sail deep, or even jibe set. Any other opinions?
And I'll actually share, we make our choices based on what the boats ahead of us are doing, which really isn't necessarily the right way to make those decisions.
Well, you need to look at what the boats ahead of you are doing, where the boats are behind you, and know what you've been doing in the past and what you expect to change in the wind, or where there's more wind or less wind or current or...
There's one other point here.
Go ahead.
One other point I'd like to make. In my experience, most captains look at the spinnaker run as time to sit back in the boat and enjoy the ride. And if you ever want to beat the entire fleet, get as far forward as you can on that bloody boat, unless it's really big wind, and get your butt out from sinking down and dragging, and you walk away from the fleet, because 99% of all people I've sailed with really like that. Gee, it doesn't look beautiful. I want to watch my spinnaker, sit back and enjoy the ride instead of compete. The moment they're around there, get forward.
We call that sailing the boat downhill.
There you go.
Bow down and the transom up. But really, the whole strategic and tactical approach to the Windward Mark that we've talked about here is all to set you up in order to sail the 80% of the course that's in between the Windward Mark and the Leeward Mark. Where do you want to be in order to sail fast in between the Windward Mark and the Leeward Mark? What's your strategy from getting from 1 to 3? And that's what you have to think about before you get there in order to know how to set up for it.